Alright, we're going to change the transmission fluid and the filter on this 04 Silverado. It should be the same for the years listed in the title. This is for the 4L60E transmission. All 1500s had this transmission up to a certain year. Some 2500s had it as well. There's slight differences while you'll be under the truck depending on whether you have 2-wheel drive or 4-wheel drive or the V8, short cab, extended cab, things like that. So there might be slight variances, but this is how you do it on the 4L60E transmission, and I go over some of those variances and differences throughout the video. So it takes Dextron 6. Typically I'd buy something better than Fram, but that's all the auto parts store had available in Dextron 6, so that's what we got. That's actually 4 quarts and we need 5 is what they said, so we do have an extra little one to go with that as well. This isn't a complete fluid flush and change. This is just the fluid that we're going to lose by dropping the pan to replace the filter. So your transmission pan, this is the front of the vehicle here. Transmission pan up here in between your catalytic converters, just behind your oil pan there. You can see your oil filter. So this will be your pan. Probably have to move this parking linkage away some to drop that pan. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. Other than that, you can get whatever's in the way out of the way. Get those bolts out and drop it. I believe there's a few in the back side there that are a little difficult to get to, but we'll show that as we get there. Make sure you secure on a jack stand and park. We leave the jack under it for a little extra assurance, but especially since you're going to be messing with this shifting linkage, make sure the truck isn't going to roll on you, so it's also a good idea to put some blocks under the wheels as well, and obviously do it on flat level ground. Alright, so to get these bolts here around the corner, these pan bolts, your linkage is in the way, you can use a regular box end wrench like this and just go up like that and get them from the different sides. But if you're going to want to use if you're going to use a torque wrench when you put this back on, which I'll give the torque spec and all that, you know, something like this, and I've been doing this so long that I don't use a torque wrench, but your torque spec is going to be 9 foot-pounds of torque on these bolts, and we'll go over that later when we get to that. But if you're going to use a torque wrench, you might have to move this linkage so you can get your socket and extension up in there to use your torque wrench. If you're not going to use a torque wrench, then it doesn't matter. But if you are, you're going to have to move this linkage. So this little metal clip goes in under this fin on both sides. So you'll have to pry that out with a little flathead screwdriver. And then you'll have to squeeze those clips together with a needle nose, reaching around to the back side also. Push it through until they're clear. Okay? And then if you pull real hard, you might have to use both hands, and this is going to shift on you. It'll pull through. Alright, like that. And then you'll be able to slide it out. Oh shit. This is hard to record and show you guys. Anyways, you get it back to this point, then you can slide out of the way like that, so you can get your torque wrench and socket up in there. If this slides up, you'll see a little plastic wire that the cable runs through. Don't freak out, just slide this plastic clip back down flush to here, because it might slide up on you. But that's how you get it out of the way. So then to put it back in, you have to line this up, shove it through, and then slide your clip back in. Alright, so you can see our fluid's pouring out now. We started from the back, especially since the front of the vehicle's lifted. So as you loosen these bolts, they'll start pouring. We haven't even got all of them loose yet. So I think the 4-wheel drive, you don't have very good clearance here, I guess because of the transfer case and whatnot. As I said, this is 2-wheel drive V6. So I believe these back bolts on the 4-wheel drive is harder to get to, but on the V6 here, 2-wheel drive, it's real easy to get to them. As I said, if you want, you can move that linkage, but we just stuck our regular box end wrench up in there and loosened them. Left this linkage alone and attached and all that, other than taking it out to show you. So I'm going to work on getting the rest of these bolts loosened, and then crappy part is this thing's going to be full when you go to drop it, so you're going to have to try to like catch it as you get the bolts loose. And that's the other thing, don't let it hang from like one end. It's best if you have help or put something under it to get all the bolts out first, and then lower it and dip the fluid out, because it's got all that weight in there from that fluid sitting in that pan. So if you just let it set on a couple bolts and don't support it, then you're going to bend your pan. Alright, so we got this thing dropped, but depending on what model you have, it'll be slightly more pain in the ass, less. So ours was catching, where is it at? So we didn't have any issues getting those rear bolts like some of the V8s might, or the 4-wheel drives might, or whatever. But the issue we had was this bracket right here. Oh, you did bend it. The pan's catching this bracket here, okay? So it didn't matter if you took this out or not, it's hitting this metal part right here on this V6 2-wheel drive. And we can get it out. On the top, there's 2 bolts that are Torx bit, or whatever that is, okay? And I found the right size, but it destroyed it. And I'll add the freaking size of the video, because I know you guys are gonna ask. We hit it with PB Blaster, and they are so seized in there. Surprisingly, again, they're on the top side here. You gotta feel for them. Right there's one, and the second one's back in there. But they're those Torx bits. Surprisingly, it didn't round it out, but it actually candy cane twisted my bit, and then it snapped out. So that's how freaking seized in there, even after hitting it with PB Blaster. So I could not take this bracket off to get it out of the way. We tried prying a little bit with a ball joint fork, pickle fork, whatever you want to call it, right there. You can't pry too hard, because the only thing you got to pry against is the edge of the transmission here, which there's a real thin lip on that side. So if you pry too hard, you're gonna bust your trans case, and then you'll really be screwed. So we couldn't get it that way. Came up with an idea to adjust this to the correct size from whatever angle, like that, and then we use that to pry on it. You might have to flip it one way or the other, and you can see it's actually bent now. It's supposed to be straight up and down. I was contemplating cutting it off and welding it back on if I had to, but we were able to bend it using this method. So now when we're done, we'll just bend it back to the approximate area. So with him bending that back, I was able to wobble that off and pop it off. So with a 2-wheel drive V6, that's what you're going to be looking at. That's going to be in the way. However, I watched a video where the guy was doing I believe it was a V8 4-wheel drive, and the bracket wasn't in the way, but he couldn't get to the rear bolts very easily, whereas we could. So you have your own set of challenges depending on which model you have, but that's how we got that one out of there. So then we're changing the filter. Right here's your filter, so it'll just pop out. You got to wiggle it, and it'll pop out of this hole here. It's slowly coming. Obviously it'd be easier with 2 hands. Same from both sides, wiggle back and forth, like, and there you go. And then there's also a rubber grommet up in there, if it didn't come out with it, which I don't think it did. It didn't. So you can, if you're going to try to get it out, you got to be sure to get it out. The new one comes with a new grommet, so you either got to get a pickup in there or a screwdriver and not damage your aluminum housing in doing so. But if you start at it, you're going to have to get it out, because if you mess it up with the screwdriver trying to bend it to pull it out, or the pick or whatever, then your new one might not seal in it like it's supposed to. So if you want to replace that, that's what you got to do. Kind of try to get under the edge with a little flathead and bend it up so you can pop it out, or a pick or something like that. But once you go for it, you're committed if you damage it. So go ahead and clean your pan off inside and out while you got it off. You got to get this gasket off here. It's like a paper type, so it's real easy to tear. I'm going around the edge with this chisel type thing. You can use a flathead like that, but it's going to take you a lot longer. Basically just work the edge loose all the way around, and I haven't even got all the way around yet. I'm just working on the very edge, and this is already coming up here. The other side seems to be more stuck, but I'm trying to go around the edge all the way. Just tap, 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 tap. Make sure you don't got too much of an angle digging into it. I ran into a couple burrs as well, so I had to adjust around those. But I'm just working on going around this edge, and then hopefully I'll keep going around and then go deeper and deeper each time, trying to get it up without tearing it. If you tear it, you're going to have to take a gasket scraper or a razor blade to it, which is a pain in the ass because this is real thin aluminum, so you cut into this aluminum. I can see there's a lip here too. That's going to affect how it seals, so try to get it off in one piece if you can, using the methods I showed. That way you don't have to fight with a gasket scraper, especially with this bump being right here, because you can't go across it with a razor blade or a gasket scraper because this freaking lip's here. It would be a nightmare if you tear this one. It's going to take you forever to scrape it off. Yeah, I keep getting caught at these eyelets with the chisel because it's catching that bump right there. See that? So don't ram your chisel into that and tear it up. That's why it's stopping around the eyelets. Okay, so I got the gasket off, so you need to clean up your surface here. We'll need to do the same to the bottom of the transmission. You want to go around and clean all this crap off, and obviously scrape any gasket that may have stuck. But we got lucky and it came all off in one piece. So you want to go over this, spray brake parts cleaner or starting fluid, something like that, into a rag, and then wipe the edges. That'll take the grease and oil and stuff off. Especially when you go to the transmission, spray it into the rag. You don't want to spray it and get it up in the transmission. It'll ruin stuff. So spray it into your rag and then wipe it with the rag. Alright, so this is the orientation that's going back on. You see you got that slot there for the rear. If yours was the 8 or the 4-wheel drive or whatever, where you did have a drain plug, there's your divot, would be in the front. So that goes towards the front. Slot goes towards the rear. Driver's side of the truck. So that's how it's going on. So this will help you line this gasket up correctly. It's got a little cutout right here for this little divot that's only right there. And then also the front of the pan here cuts in. And then you can see your gasket's got a little cut in there too. So you get that lined up and that lined up. And you might have to flip it so that your holes line up. But that's how it goes on. So that'll match that. And that cutout will match that. And then make sure your bolt holes line up. Alright, so I don't know if all gaskets going to be like this or what, but we put this up in here already, and then we were having difficulty getting these bolts through. So the hole in the gasket is smaller than the thread on the bolt, so we had to drop it back down, and we're shoving them through. You got to kind of like hold the gasket down, push up on the bolt, and thread it at the same time, but be careful not to tear the gasket. I would also say don't push them all the way through, or you might have clearance issues once you try to get it back up in there. And this bracket was in the way again because it sprang back some from where we bent it out, so I'm having to put that back on it and bend it out of the way again to get that up in there. But for us with this gasket, we're having to shove them through first, because once we get it up there, we can't get them through and reliably threaded without having to worry about stripping them. So this is what we're doing. And again, I'm not sure if all gaskets are going to do this. Some might be different. So I can't guarantee that this is the exact pan or not, although it looks pretty identical. I didn't count the bolt holes or nothing, but whenever you install a pan, you torque from the center out in a crisscross pattern. So even if this isn't the exact one, this will work. So as you can see there, you go from the center out, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and so on. Crisscross pattern. So there's your torque sequence right there. Whether that's exact to the pan or not, it's going to work. Just follow that sequence. Torque spec is 9 foot-pounds of torque. That's not very much at all. That's like barely snug. So I like to go a little extra, like 10 or 11 personally. But the actual spec is 9 foot-pounds of torque. Follow your crisscross pattern. Using the torque wrench, you'll want to use a 1/4 inch drive that actually does inch pounds, because foot-pounds wrench usually aren't that accurate for that low of a number, so you'll want to do 108 inch-pounds with a 1/4 inch drive torque wrench. 108 inch-pounds would be the 9 foot-pounds I just quoted. If you want to go 10 instead, it'd be 120 inch-pounds. So go over that torque sequence. I like to go over them 3 times, because as you tighten it down and torque it, you'll work some of the other bolts loose a little bit. So do that pattern 3 times. Just go over them all 3 times. That way you're ensuring they're all tight and none of them came loose while you were torquing the pan down. So after you've done that, you've gone over your sequence a few times, you torque down, fill it up with the fluid. Like I said, it was 5 quarts. You just put a funnel to your where your dipstick goes in, check the trans level, and you can pour it down in through there. Very, very highly recommend you start the truck, let it get up to full operating temperature, and then let it run for another 20 minutes. So basically just let it sit there and run for a half an hour. It's going to let the engine and trans heat up. The trans won't heat up that much because the transmission doesn't really get hot until you're actually driving around. But it'll help some. Let it run for a half hour and then let it completely cool down for several hours, however long it takes depending on your ambient temperature for the vehicle to completely cool down. It gives it a heat cycle. It helps that gasket seat. But as I said, the transmission doesn't get that hot just sitting at idle. So then after you do that, take the truck out for a decent 10 or 15 minute drive where you get up to speeds of at least 55 miles per hour. But take it easy, try to definitely keep it under half throttle. Try to keep it at, try not to go any more than 1/4 throttle. Just go for like a normal basic drive and don't romp on it. Good 10-15 minute drive, getting up to 55 miles per hour. Get that transmission good and hot so that gasket can burn and seat to the transmission. Bring it back, let it cool off again, and then you should be good to go. But it's good to give it whenever you replace any gasket on anything, on any part, give it a good couple heat cycles, hot and cold, fully, to make sure that that gasket seats, to ensure that you don't have any leaks. After a few normal drives, get back under the truck and retorque them all in that sequence to make sure none of them came loose. Sometimes that happens because the torque spec is so light. It's so light because the pan's so thin and you don't want to bend it and whatnot. But sometimes it can happen to where those bolts will rattle loose after a few drives. So you want to get under there after a few drives and just recheck them all, make sure none of them came loose, and you should be good to go.